for right now, we have Dutch Gunner, who is very big into the lore, very big into doing things in game when it comes to the lore. One of the main leadership for Arataka Research Consortium, and a good friend of mine. So, what we wanted to do today is there's this kind of one of the things I always get asked, and this even happened yesterday when we were talking about, was that how do you get involved, right? What do we do right now to get involved with the lore? And I mentioned yesterday that the problem with giving that kind of answer is that these are things that are like happening, right? So the moment that we knew that there were things to collect off of the wrecks of the ships, within 24 hours, we had all the pieces, right? Because once you know what to do, if I could tell you what needs to happen to make something in the lore right now, then it would already be being done. It's like asking somebody what's like the big deal on the market right now, right? If you hear about it, that means a lot of other people have heard about it. So it's one of those things that's like you just have to keep on top of it. However, there's another side to this, which is that we live in a really interesting universe, and CCP not only creates their own story that we engage with, but in general, we try to maintain that things that happen in game are canonical, and therefore players can initiate their own actions that can have profound ramifications. Everything from small acknowledgments to profound ramifications. Like, for instance, the Ugidi situation. Not Ugidi, Ugali situation in the Caldari Galente space largely started because of some RP by somebody when they were fracking a moon with an Athanor. All that is to say, Dutch Gunner is probably the master, or part of the group of people who are the masters of let's make our own things happen in the universe. And this last weekend represents a really good example of that. So let's talk about, let's start out actually by talking about some of the previous examples of things that you have done to engage with the lore before we talk about what we did.
Okay, first of all, I think you're giving me way too much credit to say I'm one of the masters. Let's just say I have a knack for it. Leave it at that. Because when I try to do things, or when I do things, even for me, it's many times it's just the question is like, is it going to trigger something? Is it going to be acknowledged? Is it going to be mentioned somewhere? But that's part of the charm for me, to organize these kind of things. But if we're talking about the first thing that at least I can recall, that would be in the years back with Arak'Jilan, when Hilan Tukos was still a living character. And when he was found dead and confirmed dead, I announced to organize a memorial in his honor to remember what he did. And that got briefly streamed and shared by CCP on Twitter. So that was probably the first one that got acknowledged.
Right. Okay. So Highland Tukos was a pretty big lore character, and there was some player interaction with that too, right? Because we found Tukos' body. Lucas, I think it was, got the brain slice, and there's this whole thing about it. So there already was kind of like an interaction between players and the lore, and actually, really everything surrounding Highland Tukos was a really good example of players and CCP working together to create the lore. The entire concept of the Highland Tukos character was to be kind of an insert for Dropbear to work with the players for unraveling the mystery of Noikis. However, years later, during the Drifter release, there was a video that came out from him, discovered the Drifter Hives originally, and we determined that he was dead, yada, yada, yada. So you played into that and did a funeral service, which then got recognized. How did they you said it's just the Twitter?
Yeah, it was in the Scope News. It was in the bottom with just the headers. You'll now see with breaking news or short news, where it was mentioned that Capsulators were organizing a memorial service. for Helen Tukos, and that's something where it's just like it's mentioned in the news. A character that is well known and very heavily interacted with dies. Like, what is a common thing to do? Let's hold a memorial service, and I announce it 2 weeks in advance. Like, hey, look, let's have a memorial service on that time. And it turned out to be really amazing because some people showed up and had fantastic speeches written out.
Awesome. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to jump into saying 07 to Epidemic for your 5 months of subscriptions. Thank you so much for that. So, okay. Any other good examples of you kind of taking what's going on and so I think that it's actually important to note that like it may not seem as like a gamer a big deal to just get like your name like, oh, this headline is tangentially referring to the thing that I did or whatever. But let me tell you, man, look, Ma, I'm on TV, right? Like it is the news, right? People are doing stuff all the time. Not all of it makes it to the news, and it feels there's a certain special validation to even just see something noted in the world news. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've organized another thing where I ask everybody who participated to keep quiet about it, and um, it was mentioned in the world news, and we can talk about what it was later, but it was mentioned, and I can tell you that everybody who was part of that fleet, me included, were extremely ecstatic to see it being mentioned.
I also know that you were really big in the drifter situation and also the invasion situation as a major FC for the Eden forces. I remember.
The
At least no
drifter,
pre chapter 3. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, the drifters, that was before I really got heavily involved with Arc and the lore. But chapter 1 and before chapter 1, yeah, that's where I started to get heavily involved and turn out to be the major FC for Arc with regard to conduits and big challenge sites such as the World Arc Proving Ground in chapter 1 and the Observatory Flashpoints in chapter 2.
Right. Sorry, when I said drifter, I meant more the modern stuff that you did. You studied the drifter doomsday system, the guidebook on. Was that ever recognized by CCP, by the way?
Not directly, and at the
Okay.
same time, like I will give credit where credit is due. Like what I did with the manual on how to deal with the Drifter Doomsday, a lot of it was already found out and worked out by earlier players. They just never really put it on paper, and I just looked at their mechanics and their thoughts behind it. It's like surely it can be done in a cheaper way, and that's what I started testing, and that's turned out to be correct. And after a couple of months of testing with 2 fleets a week, we got enough confirmation to say, yep, this seems to be how it is. Let's get that manual out there. And right. It was a bit of a race because once I started running those fleets, more and more people took interest. So I think it was also a bit of a race, like who can get their work out the first.
Well, you downplay your contribution, but we all stand on shoulders of giants, right? Like, I mean, but either way, it was a very good production. So I think that really leads to the thing that you just alluded to, which was, I guess, your first big attempt of taking something that was not something that's actively happening in the lore, but more was a lore point of interest, and engaging with it in a way that created something effectively out of nothing, right? So, yeah. So what was your secret project? Because I remember actually, just to tease this a little bit more for everybody, a couple of weeks ago or months ago, oh God, time doesn't mean anything anymore. There was a World News article report, and I was going through it just like I normally do. And there was one point that I was like, man, this has to be something, but it's weird because I haven't heard anything about it. And I even like messaged, you were one of the people I messaged, and you were like, oh I don't know. And then like a few weeks later, you came to me and was like, so let's talk about it. How did you make it into the news without anybody knowing about it?
I'm gonna say one of the let's go back a couple of steps because there's multiple ways in which you can make these things happen. Like, one of the things is you can be a bit hush-hush about it and drop a hint towards CCP, like, hey, this is what I'm doing, drop an off-direction report of what has happened, and then wait and see if something happens. Or you can be doing something for a while, then go public about it, and see if it gains more traction, and that could trigger the interest of a mention by CCP, or at least it's being mentioned in the news. Or alternatively, you can go announcing what you're trying to do to everybody in the game, start implementing it, and see what happens from there. And
I actually feel like we need to take a step back. What you just said just reminded me. We do need to take a step back because there was an attempt by you before this where you learned a very valuable lesson about announcing things ahead of time.
Yeah.
You want to tell that story real quick?
I made an announcement about organizing a evacuation fleet out of Poshvin. That got into a very spicy political forum post on the Intergalactic Summit. CCP got involved, and the really short version is that the attempt blew up in my face.
Yeah,
that was a painful lesson for me.
The short and the long of it, I have it pulled up actually right here. So while he was trying to negotiate with the players in regards to giving them access to Pochvin with their stuff in order to do this operation, right? Unfortunately, the NPC actor, this is actually the very first time we ever saw Subcommander Seriatim Foucault, who's the guy that's giving the big speech in the 1-year anniversary of Pochvin video. Which, by the way, Totality Day is coming soon, right? So, or did?
No, it's coming. It's coming. It's
okay.
Not there yet. It's coming soon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's coming up. So that should be interesting. Either way, so he steps in and basically says, nah. So like the players were into you being okay with grabbing the stuff out, but because you made this in the in-character forums, it was public. CCP stepped in, and the NPC actor kiboshed it, which of course made the pro-Triglavians then try to be disruptive of your own efforts. And then there's a saboteur within your own group. It was a fun melodrama. But the point is that you learned a valuable lesson, which is OPSEC, right?
There's things where if you're trying to organize public things, you have to accept that OPSEC is an illusion, because either you have it out in the public or you have OPSEC. You can't have it both ways.
Right. So with your next experiment, you attempted to do some OPSEC. So what was the actual thing?
The actual thing is, in Poshvin, you have 3 monument sites, one for each clade. You've got the Skarkon Shipyard belonging to the Svarog clade. You have the rogue drone, I just call it Thingamabob, in Wirashoda. And then you've got
Nafka.
Then you've got the parent clade arena. And earlier fleets I organized to basically map out the contents of the rogue drone site in Wirashoda and the Skarkon shipyard in Skarkon, to just see what's in here, do we see any changes, and if we find any strange things, let's theorize about what it could possibly mean. And while doing that, like, one of the things that really stood out is that with the show info description of some of the items in the rogue drone site in Wirashoda, it had some potentially big implications on what could be happening in the future. I mean, you've got rogue drones being converted, coerced, or just seduced to start working together with Triglavians. And the thought of Triglavians working in tandem with rogue drones, that's one nasty power block to be going up against if they decide to attack on a target.
Okay, so I actually, this is that brings up a good point, which is that a lot of good information is in the description of. People don't realize it's very kind of Dark Soulsian in the fact that there's a lot of environmental storytelling.
Yep. And was one of those cases where it's like, you know what? Let's poke at it and see what happens. So what I did was I announced an experiment where I asked people to show up in pure fire bombers, and we are just going to test things. And what we ended up doing was taking a group of stealth bombers into the side and set up a multi-toad of bombing runs with electron bombs, because the thought behind it was this seems to be broadcasting equipment. These are rogue drones. Broadcasting equipment, rogue drones, they're rather vulnerable to electromagnetic damage. So let's just throw as much of it at it as we can. And with the area effect of the bombs, we could potentially hit all the objects that we want to hit at the same time.
Okay, right. So you launched EM bombs at this.
Yes.
That's the short of it.
Yes, and this was basically a case where I reached out to CCP, where it's like, look, I've got this plan. This is the thought behind it, and any outcome at all, is going to have its own ramifications, and it's going to be very interesting. Because if nothing happened, it's like, wait, you got rogue drones and broadcasting equipment that is immune to electromagnetic damage. How do they do that? If there was damage, but it would be superficial, it's like, oh, aha. So even though within the game it's a monument site and it doesn't take damage, if you throw enough damage at it, it might have an effect and progressing the story. So
you never know.
Yeah, that's part of the goes. Like, we're just going to do this experiment, and we just want to see what happens. And if nothing happens, no biggie. So, and then afterwards, everything what happened.
I have it pulled up right here. So in YC-124, which is of course 2022, 0622, we have escalating tensions over Othanoon as Caldari and Galente forces clash in Warzone. So this is the World News article. It's about the fight that started in Othanoon over the Edencom facility. It also talks about the... Oh, no, that was a different... So this is like the tensions building up at the beginning of the summer, right? Mm-hmm. So down here in the news in brief, we have Edencom raids Velis Clade rogue drone Semiosis Subornost in Wiashota after Capsuleers repeatedly disrupt complex with EM bombs. So good job. You let Edencom raid the facility. Go
help
you.
Make it possible. Yes.
Excellent. All right. So once again, like, that may feel like a small thing, but to the person who did it, you literally made a world news headline out of nothing, right? Like that cannot be understated. And a lot of video games, even MMOs, just simply wouldn't have the capacity to recognize that. Not only because of the fact that, or least of all, because it's a single shard in Eve. In WoW, there's multiple cannons, so you can't necessarily have somebody like make an event that means something to the actual universe individually. But at the same time, like, they tied this into the larger story of Edencom and their operations within Pochvin. So you never know. Like, CCP has in the past taken something as innocuous as this and used it in their tapestry that they're weaving, right? Like, as a storyteller, they know that Edencom is escalating their stuff in their operations in Pochvin, and they may even know where that may want to go at some point. But they're still working out the details. And what Dutch Gunner has done here is basically handed them one of the details, canonizing what he has done and locking it in. So now I can't tell the story of how Edencom fought over Pochvin without talking about Dutch Gunner and his EM bomb. That's pretty effing cool.
It's really awesome, because this was so much more than what I was expecting, and I find it additionally interesting that our bombing runs were mentioned, and at the end, myself and somebody else was caught and killed, but nobody made the connection, and nobody local to Poshfen actually decided, you know what, let's do something about it. So this is more one of those cases where, hey, look, this is something that would fit in the overarching story between Edencom / the Empires and the Triglavian Collective. Let's do it and see if it's get picked up on, and it might lead to something being mentioned, and it could lead to a interesting development in the story months later or sooner. Because one thing CCP definitely has shown is that they don't mind sitting on gems for years and then going, haha, so that one thing that happened that back then, ta-da, it's connected this way. Or because that happened, this is the current situation.
Turns out it always mattered. Yeah, so actually, I think that this is important to talk about too. Has there been any major projects? Because this takes, I'm sure, like, I mean, it's not like a Herculean effort. I don't want to like make it sound like you built some sort of like grand plaza or something like that. But you know, there's coordination involved. It's not nothing to put together these fleets and getting people together and making sure that everybody has the right stuff. Which, by the way, I want to point out there are some comments about the fact that it was a purifier. Bombers are racially bonused for their damage type. Are so, but any rate, you know, it it was enough of an effort that if you got nothing for it, I'm sure that there would be a certain amount of disappointment. Have there been any good examples that you can think of real efforts that you've put together that ended up not, like, in spite of the fact that you've sent it to CCP or whatever, it just didn't, it got ignored? How often does that happen?
Yes, that was one of my earlier attempts where I decided to tie in with the developments back then, but this is many years ago, where I decided to hold a protest, and basically two other people showed up, so it absolutely fell flat on its face.
Right.
And that's part of the
But that's a
risk
flaw in
that you're
execution.
taking.
That's not a flaw in CCP acknowledging it.
Now, it's part of a learning curve, because what I learned from that experience is that if you want to organize things, you should aim to organize them in such a way that, with or without CCP support, it's still something fun and engaging to do for people that show up.
That's fair. The reason why I'm asking this is because, you know, if I'm going to be suggesting to people, hey, just make a big cool thing and a fleet and do something and it'll get acknowledged. Like, I want people to understand what is the likelihood of this actually. I don't want people to do such a thing. Like, okay, this time we're going to bomb the Ironclad proving conduit with explosive bombs and send it to Delegate Zero, and oh, it didn't even get acknowledged. I'm mad now because Dutch Gunner got it and I didn't. Like, how frequently, how good, or how, what's your hit or miss ratio, do you think, when it comes to like player built events and it being recognized?
It really comes down to having a bit of a feel for it, like what is happening, what is big right now, and if we organize something that works with it or alongside it, is it good enough or not? And that's
Right.
something that really comes down to, like, hey, look, when you go for something, make sure that you'll have fun with zero support from CCP. The
That's
one
fair.
thing that I had with the Wira Shoda was I taught people how bombing runs worked. Like, you have to be on grid when a bomb goes off for it to do damage. If you just launch a bomb and warp off and you're off grid, nothing happens. You have to be on grid. So you need to be aligned, have bookmarks set up. If you run out of bombs, like, you need to rearm. Do you have something stockpiled in system? In my case, I brought a blockade runner along so we could reload in mid-space. And the next part is make a proper estimation on how much effort is involved, because with the Wira Shoda thing, we made 26 bombing runs in about 2 hours, where we had no real break between the bombing runs. It was just go at it, go at it, go at it. Out of bombs, okay, warp off, reload, come back, go at it. So we were really at it for quite some time. And in my case, when the people showed up, I also told them, like, look, this is an experiment. I'm not sure if something's going to happen. Don't count on it. But if it does happen, super awesome. Do keep quiet about it, because in this particular case, it's about trying to show what the options are right now. Like, hey, you can interact with damage immune monuments and still progress the story in one way or the other. Like, it might just be a footnote, but it's there. You made that happen.
Right. Yeah, I think that the key here, I think you hit it, which is that it has a lot less to do with CCP and a lot more to do with you. Like CCP is weaving a story, right? Delegate Zero is like weaving this story. He knows where it's going, and like I said, the rough idea of what kind of things need to happen. But if you hand him a thread that matches into that weave, he'll weave it in, right? Like, so the best thing to do is be aware of what's going on and doing the classic improv thing of saying yes and, right? Like, okay, well, this is what's being presented to us. These are the rules of it. I'm going to engage with that. The more off the beaten trail you get, the less likely that it will be acknowledged. You know, moon fracking and Ugali's notwithstanding, but you know, like if you had done something against the Sancha in the same time frame, probably they would be less inclined to mention it or to take note of it, because it, like, that isn't what they are trying to highlight right now. You are giving them a tool in telling their story, and so yeah, they take it and they use it.
I think it also helps that the way it was run, it was also not about pushing it in a certain direction, or saying, I want this to happen. It's like, look, we're going to do it, and whatever happens, whatever the outcome is, we'll roll with it. Like, we don't want one specific outcome. That's just
Right.
smashing rocks together and see what happens. And then once you have a result, work with that.
Right. It's just like a tabletop RPG, right?
Yes.
The only thing you can do is say what you're trying to do, and then the DM or GM or whatever determines what actually the outcome of that attempt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, and in this case, CCP is showing a lot of similarities with tabletop, where they are in control as the storyteller with, this is happening, this is what you can encounter and interact with as a player, while at the same time, because they're now working with the story arcs, to me at least, that was a sign that they're open for player actions, and if it ties in one way or the other, sooner or later, they're willing to roll with it and pick it up and make adjustments on how the story progresses. And I did the test with Weber Shoda. I got a result, and I took it as a confirmation that yes, it is possible.
Right. Yeah. And every time I've ever like heard CCP talking about this kind of stuff, they are consistent with that. They see themselves as a GM, like when it comes to the lore and it playing out, like they are a GM for a universe, and we are players within it, as opposed to like in like a WoW context where it's like there are storytellers and there are readers of the story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's no accident that that a reasonable amount of CCP, especially those creative types, have both come from or at least mingled with the guys that they took over from buying White Wolf, which was a major tabletop role playing game. So you know, they literally have a bunch of tabletop role player storytellers and stuff within their ranks. So it tracks.
Fair,
Real quick, 07 to you, Jameston, 1994. Thank you for that. So, go on.
CCP has done a lot like this before, and I'm going to take it as loosely as possible, the earlier years of Eve. But there's just this one point where the scales tip, where the amount of players become so big and player actions become so numerous that it's pretty much unattainable to work with everything that the players are doing and tie it in with a more open way of progressing the story. Like, you have to find a balance between the sandbox with here's your tool and oh, you're making some really cool things, let add bits here and there, and the more classic railroad kind of story, whereas look, this is happening and there are one or two outcomes, but you don't really have that much influence or that much to add. You're just there for the story as it is laid out before you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it might have been a population issue, but there was, and I've talked about this a few times when I refer to like the physical structure of the lore of Eve. In other words, like how it played out over the years. But I know that there was kind of this 1-2 blow of a lot of people were kind of unhappy with the dramatic change in storytelling and kind of the themes that came from really the Empyrean Age, but then certainly with Templar 1, right?
Mm-hmm,
You know, there's a lot of people that were really down for like the space politics stuff, and then suddenly there's space ghosts and, you know, weird alien AI, and just like it just felt like it went to left field for a lot of people. While simultaneously also kind of um, devaluing a lot of the community efforts that had been going on with things like, hey, 07 to you, Styler Star, good to see you. As we mentioned earlier, actually, with Highland Tukos, there's Highland Tukos and Eric Jalan project that were working together, CCP and players working together to unravel the mystery of Anoikis, of wormhole space. And then, right, like literally days after, somebody finally pieces together the piece and says, well, I think that this thing that they're talking about is actually an artificial intelligence. Boom, here comes Templar 1 that basically lays it all out in a very omniscient-y kind of way, solving the mystery that they've been working on for like over a year. So, and then shortly thereafter, the main guy who was doing the lore stuff and really engaging with the player base about it, C-Speed Drop Air, left the company. So those events really cooled the players off. There was always like that, like, oh, you know, the RPers are the nerdy guys that know way too much about this game. Like, there's always been like a like it's always been a fringe thing. But with those events, that fringe thing got upset. A lot of them like got quit, and because the rest of the player base were focused on everything being about the players, the overall lore thing kind of went quiet for a few years. And of course, there was the kind of the came back with the Drifters and Rubicon, but then that project had problems with their AI when they deployed it, so it got delayed, which made it so that the Drifter attacks plot had to get kind of stymied. So there's problems after that, but I think that the transition really came from the fact that CCP did change the way that the story was unfolding between 2008 to 2012. But that being said, what I think is that this new story arc thing is the real point here is that the story arc stuff is not a new concept for CCP. It's just a new degree of focus on that concept. Does that make sense? Like, we've always had story arcs. They've always had things happening. And they've often always had some sort of result of equipment coming out. Sometimes, in the case of T3 destroyers, it decided which one came out first. Like, these have all been features of the game throughout all these years, but they've never highlighted it and elevated it to the level that they have now. I think that that's the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know that was kind of a meandering
different
point,
approach.
but well, that's my point. I don't think it is a different approach. It's just a different prioritization. I guess a different approach on the meta level. I mean, like,
I think we mean the same, but we just give it a different moniker, a different label, if you will.
no, I'm with you. I get what you're saying. Hey,
Sorry, I'm late.
no, it's good. It's good. How long do you have before you got to go?
Oh, I can go all day now.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, then let's finish up with Dutch Gunner, and then we'll get to your stuff. Because we've been talking now for about 40 minutes, and we've managed to actually tease it and not yet mention what happened this weekend after saying that it was so interesting. So, if we moved on to the next topic right now, I think that people might lynch me. So, Dutch Gunner, let's just jump into it. So, you did the EM bombs. That got into the world news. This is This is like been a confirmation for you. What happened this weekend? Decided to do.
Well, with the news and the feedback based on what we did in YellowCladKing, I decided to organize a raid on the Svarog orbital shipyards in Skarkon, where we basically worked with the assumption, because there are, I'm just going to call them pylons, besides the shipyard towers in Skarkon. And those pylons also showed up in the rogue drone site in YellowCladKing. So based on the assumption that both those structures were similar, that would mean they would be susceptible to being disrupted with EM damage. But doing the same thing twice without putting in extra effort, to me, it's like, yeah, you did the same thing again. What, you expect recognition? No, let's make it bigger and more challenging, especially because with the YellowCladKing side, we could hit all the structures that seem to be of interest with one location. But with the layout of the shipyard, we first had to piece out, like, okay, wait, so we can't do it with one point of detonation for the bombs. How many do we need? And then we figured out we could do it with two, but that means that you'll also have to set up two different squads making their bombing runs at the same time, where the points need to be far away where the bombs don't blow each other up, but close enough to make sure that everything is still being hit and everything can work with the same warp in point and warp out point. So we did that. We did more bombing runs.
Once more with pizzazz.
Yes. And
Okay.
after doing considerable more EM damage than we did in YellowCladKing, because the assumption is if you do it once, countermeasures will be set in motion to make it less easy to repeat. So once we've done almost, I think we've done close to like 2 million potential EM damage if everything would have gone flawless. But after that, we warped in a deep space transport loaded up with Marines, with the thought being initially, let's anchor containers with the Marines, but you can't anchor containers within a certain range of object. And the layout of the Svarog orbital shipyards is such a way that it was that it was impossible to put a container anywhere near the shipyards where you could say, yeah, this would make sense if that serves as a launch point and retrieval point of Marines. So instead, we warped it in and we flew around inside the site for 30 minutes before warping off again, with the thought being that's enough time for the Marines to go for basically a smash and grab, or at least attempt it, and then get out before reinforcements arrive, or anything that would be present and would be dug in would be too dug in to defend the site to make any progress. And that turned out to be perfectly correct, because just as we hit the 30-minute mark and started to get ready to warp out, we warped out just as Kikimores belonging to YellowCladKing entered the site. So that was perfect timing on our side, with just making it success. And earlier on, we did had YellowCladKing with a couple of Kikimores and one Orthos cruiser show up to try and prevent the bombing runs. So that was definitely a spicy and complication of an already challenging thing to do. But fortunately for us, initially they were set up on the beacon, so they were there, and then they could just had to sit there and watch us perform another bombing run that they could do nothing against. And And then they started to identify, wait, they're making their bombers attacks on those locations, so we're just going to position ourselves around that and spread out, and we'll catch anybody making the run, because all we need is the point, and it's bombers, so they're rather squishy. So that had to mean that we have to find different approaches, like where are they at? How can we still make a bombing run? And fortunately for us, every time we were ready, they warped off because there was a lot of activity. Either they saw a more tempting target, or there was a roaming fleet that they had to be cautious of, that they tried to avoid. So it was a short interruption, short disruption. But after about, I think, 30 minutes, they definitely left us alone, up until the point where we ended up with the Mastodon warping off. And from there, we extracted everybody out of Poshfin, called the fleet an end, because it was a long fleet, comparable in duration to what some nullsects have with a CTA. So it was longer than expected, but that's why you don't organize it that often with opportunities like this. And then at the end, I wrote a big after-action report on the Intergalactic Summit, basically laying out, like, based on what was reported on Wirashoda and earlier observations, and linking the reports that we made, like, this is what we saw, this is what we went for, this is when we made our first bombing run, this is when we made our last, total number of bombs, and overall happenings of the entire raid. And I consider it to be a great success, because we got to do everything we wanted to do. We did have some challenges with pro-Triglavian players showing up trying to do something about it. And what happens next is a case of wait and see what's going to happen next. And at the same time, like, this has been done for against Triglavians, but there's a lot of options that Triglavian players have as well to do similar things. But I'm not sure if they realized. So if there's still a bit of time, I might give some pointers on what I would be looking at if I were Triglavian in the current climate.
Be the content you want to see in the world, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of clues, but not everybody might recognize them as clues. Like with the evacuation attempt, where we had, I keep forgetting his name, where he just showed up and said, nope, nobody's being evacuated. Yep. Based on his responses, one thing he said was as well, leave us alone, or we're going to ramp up activities in the minor victory systems.
Right.
Like, if I was a
There's a threat involved.
Yep, I would say, you know what? Let's go with that. Let's pick a system, be active in it, like clear any other NPCs, do some mining in short intervals, but keep doing it over and over and over and over, and then mention it. Look, we're doing it here. Or alternatively, start with a Edencom system, minor victory, or even a stronghold if you got the hang of it, and start smashing everything from Edencom to bits, to basically say, yeah, you're there, but look at what we can do to your stronghold systems. Like, we might not grab the star, but we're still superior to you in all the ways that should matter. Or with Arshat, like, go in there, yes, it's high sec, but smash all the Edencom NPCs near that captured transmuter and claim space superiority. And sustain it for a while. I'm sure it's going to draw attention. I'm sure you can progress the story in it one way or the other.
Right. And it's funny that you say that, because in a way, that is actually what happened. Right? And this actually might even be a good segue over to ASMR over here and his reportings, because basically, Othanoon, one of the things that some people may not actually know about Othanoon is that prior to it kicking off in this weird Edencom thing, it actually was that pro-Hibernaut, pro-Triglavian players were operating that had chosen that particular minor victory, because it's a Triglavian minor victory, which would make it a Forest of Glorification. And they were attempting to coordinate a meeting between, I think, the state and the Clade. So then it kicked off into this whole, like, there's Triglavians doing experiments on the planets, which led to the Edencom structure decloaking. So there is a fair argument to be made that the whole deal with Othanoon, or at least the reason why it's Othanoon and not some other system, is because players for the Triglavian side did exactly that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, what if I was to make one suggestion, I would say, like, hey, Totella Day is coming up. That's bound to draw a lot of pro Triglavian players together at one space. Use it as a forming, and why not make a raid on the RShat site and show your superiority in space over Edencom, and try to push on a certain narrative with regard to that specific site. It's a golden opportunity.
I will also say that looking over your report, incredible write-up for the record. Like, this is a really cool artifact, and hopefully this will be a relevant enough of an event that people will come back and refer to it at some point. Clearly, you put a lot of work into it. So
yeah,
thanks for making this happen.
I'm really happy with trying to get other pro-Empire roleplay aligned organizations on board as well, by just giving them a poke, like, hey, I'm organizing this thing. Are you willing to contribute by providing this many Marines? And if you're going to do that, let me know what you would call that force of Marines. And that's what I concluded in the report as well.
Yeah. So what's next then? Like, obviously we don't know whether or not there's a reaction to what you did now. What do you think about next? What's going to happen? What is Dutch Gun running up to?
Right now, for me, I don't see any direct opportunities. But that also depends on what's happening with the rest of the story.
That's true.
Things are getting more and more spicy, so that's also a matter of seeing how that pans out. Because who knows? But it's certainly interesting times, and I look forward to the next opportunity. And if there's somebody who sees something that they'd like to organize, but they're not sure on how to best go for it, feel free to reach out to me. Like, if anything, it's been proven that people can keep their mouth shut, and if you want to try and organize something, I'll gladly give you pointers, but it's your thing. So you get to organize it and claim the credit in any way you wish, in any way you want.
Right, and there's all kinds of different threads going on right now. Heck, we're looking at the Stellar Harvester transmuter thing that the MR are building. Like, there are stuff going on all over this place right now. And actually, just today, on Reddit, there was somebody. Hold on, let me see if I can pull this up. CCP Swift responded to a Reddit post with a pretty teasing statement.
Yep. It's basically find your Easter eggs. It's an Easter egg hunt.
Right. Man. Having my whole computer reset, terrible, but don't mind the light mode. It'd be dark mode, but whatever. Corrupted Trinary Relics is the post, which is talking about Othanoon and the stuff from the Navy fighting there. And CCP Swift points out that ASMR, hi ASMR, and ARC have been covering, hi ARC, have been covering this and have put together the pieces, and that's the videos that we were looking at yesterday and are on the video in the teaser and all that stuff. These are reconstructed reports. However, CCP Swift ends it with, but there may be other yet undiscovered ones out there, smiley face, which goes back to what we were talking about yesterday when it comes to how to get involved right now, which is, as we talked about, there, see this giant harvester transmuter thing. Yeah, there are things going on, guys. Let's try to figure out what it is. I don't have the answers yet because you guys haven't given me the answer.